Good evening, and welcome to our weekly class on the weekly Parsha. This week, we conclude the book of Shemos, the book of Exodus, the book that's also referred to as Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. And the conclusion of this book deals with the fact that the Jewish people go through many journeys, which alludes not just to the journeys that they went through in the desert, but for the journeys throughout our exile until we come to the final redemption through Mashiach. So this Parsha is a very, very much connected to Mashiach. And truth is, every Parsha in the Torah, every section of the Torah is connected to the central themes of Judaism, one of which, and not just one of which, but the primary one of which is that time will come when God's plan for the creation of the universe will come to fruition, which is the Messianic age. So it stands to reason that everything we read in the Torah is connected to that goal, to that end. But in some places we see the connection much more openly. And one indication of this is that this is the seal, the conclusion of the book of redemption, alluding to the final redemption. Also, the name of the Parsha is Pekudei. The word Pekudei has many different meanings. The meaning over here in the simple context of this Parsha is the accounts. These are the accounts of the Tabernacle, of the portable sanctuary in the desert. Now, the Hebrew word for accounts, Pekudei, also comes from a root that means to remember. And those were the words that Joseph used when he told his brothers that a time will come that God will remember the people and he will take them out of Egypt. And the Hebrew word for that is pokod, pekadati, the same root as the word pekudei. So the name of the Parsha alludes to redemption, God remembering us. And the end of the Parsha deals b'chol maseim, with all their journeys, referring to the journeys that the Jewish people have traversed through exile until they reach the final destination. So the whole book, and especially the last Parsha, emphasizes that idea. Now, most years, this Parsha, Pekudei, is read together with the preceding Parsha of Vayakhel. In leap years, as is this year, today is the first day of the month of Adar, the second Adar. We have an extra month, and therefore there are more weeks than there are Torah portions if we would consolidate these two. So they're separated into two separate sections, and we read Vayakhel separately last week, and this week we're going to be reading Pekudei separately. What is the message there? Now, the Rabbi looks at Vayakhel and Pekudei as representing two different approaches to Judaism, to life, to everything. When we deal with humanity, when we deal with existence, there's a Vayakhel perspective, and there's a Pekudei perspective. Vayakhel means, and he gathered, where Moses gathers all the people into one group, into one entity. Pekudei means accounting, where Moses makes a precise accounting of all the materials that were contributed for the construction of the Mishkan. The difference is these are opposites. Vayakhel represents the collective body of the Jewish people, how Moses had to bring them all together and unify them. And Pekudei underscores the importance of every little detail of every individual. In Judaism also, the way we view the Jewish people and humanity at large is that we focus on the collective nature of the Jewish people in particular, that we are one people, one indivisible people. The Torah uses the singular expression. When the Jews come to Mount Sinai, the Torah says, Vayichan, and he encamped, not they encamped, but he, singular, because there was such unity, they were like one entity. You couldn't separate between one Jew and another. They were all one. But then there are times when the Jewish people are divided by design into different groups. We have the 12 tribes. In fact, when the Jews crossed the Red Sea, according to the Midrash, and the sea split, the sea did not split into one wide gap, but into 12 different gaps, 12 tunnels. Each tribe went through a separate tunnel. When they built the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, and they had the menorah. The menorah was lit by the Kohen, by Aaron, and subsequently by other Kohanim in the future. They lit 7 branches. Why 7? So the mystical teachers of Kabbalah and Hasidus tell us because there were 7 emotional traits characterizing 7 different prototypes of Jewish people. There's a Jew who serves God mostly with love. There's a Jew who serves God mostly with reverence, and so on and so forth. So we have 7 different types, archetypes, that Aaron, when he would light the menorah, would kindle, would ignite the spark in each one of these categories. So the menorah could have been 1 flame, but it was 7 flames because there's a grouping of Jews into 7. And we find other groupings. We have in the Haggadah, we have the 4 sons, 4 different categories. On Sukkot, we have the 4 kinds, representing 4 classes of Jews, the knowledgeable one, the simple one, and so on and so forth. So we can be divided into many different subgroups and many different ways of categorizing us, because each individual, each color, each hue is precious. Every individual is precious. If one kills 1 person, the Talmud says it's as if he obliterated the entire world. Every person, that's why God created Adam, a singularity, to tell us that humanity is measured not by the collective power that they possess, but by each individual as a whole world. So we have both Vayakil and we have both Pekudei. There are societies that focus on the collective. Communism, for example, is an evil ideology that says that you as an individual do not count. You have to subjugate yourself to the benefit of the whole. And we believe that as well, that we have to surrender our own selfish interests for the betterment of the society at large. But that was an extreme application, an extreme alliteration of that ideology, to the point where they would kill people if they were not loyal to the Soviet Union, to the Communist Party. And we have other societies, especially in the United States, where the rights of the individual are paramount. You can sometimes have a person who's convicted of murder, no question about the person's guilt, but because of a technicality in the law, the person will go free. It doesn't happen that often, of course, but it shows that the individual sometimes is more important than the collective, because we know this person is liable to commit a crime that will endanger the lives of others. And many other examples. Judaism is a combination of the two. We have the klal, the collective, and we have the prat, the detail, the specifics. And we have to combine the two ideologies. I think I told the story many times that there was a writer, a Holocaust survivor, a very prominent Jewish writer. His name was Hillel Zeidman, Dr. Hillel Zeidman. And he wrote an article about the Rebbe, and he said he saw something very unusual about the Rebbe. Whenever he would come to the Rebbe for a private audience, where he brought his family members, and it was about his own personal life, the Rebbe always connected his personal life to his communal responsibilities, steering his individuality into concern for the whole, for the community. Then, when he would come to a Farbrengen, where the Rebbe was speaking to thousands upon thousands of people, and the Rebbe was addressing the Jewish people at large, people all over the world were able to hear it, and he was dealing with communal matters, with universal matters, matters that affected the totality of the Jewish nation and of Israel, of humanity. And in between the talks, the Rebbe would turn around to him, he would write, and the Rebbe would ask him about his family and go into personal matters of his life. And the Rebbe taught him a very powerful lesson, that when you deal with yourself as an individual, you have to connect your individuality to the whole. And when you're dealing with a community, you don't lose sight of an individual. There are so many dozens, if not hundreds of stories where the Rebbe, who was involved in such important communal matters, would notice something that an individual was suffering or was trying to get close to him, and he would notice that, and he would deal with this individual. And we have so many stories, but I have too many for me to share right now. So that we have Vayakel, the klal, the collective, and we have Pekudei, the details. But you know what? Most years, we have to combine the two. When we're thinking about the collective, you don't forget about the individual. When you think about the individual, you don't forget about the collective. But in some years, God gives us an opportunity to dwell exclusively on one aspect at a time. That way you strengthen that aspect. Sometimes we need reinforcement. If you put the two together, sometimes what could happen is that one cancels the other, and you're left without anything. So some years in a leap year is a year in which God gives us more energy. He gives us the opportunity to focus last week on the collective and this week on the individual. Now, the parsha begins with the words Eila, Pekudei. These are the accountings. There's a principle in the Talmud, and Midrash, and Rashi quotes it, that whenever the Torah uses the word Eila, these are, as opposed to Ve'ela, and these are, it means to negate what came before. We're starting something new, a radical departure from what was discussed before. But it's not a radical departure, because what was discussed before was the construction of the Mishkan. And this is about the accounting for the construction. So why does it use the term Eila, these are, and not and these are? So some commentators say that it's trying to tell us that this was a departure from the egel, from the golden calf. But that doesn't hold water, because the golden calf's story was mentioned 2 weeks ago, not last week's parsha. Last week's parsha ended with the construction of the actual Mishkan, talking about the pillars of the Mishkan and the pegs of the tabernacle and of the courtyard all around were made from copper. So it concludes with a Mishkan, and so why would we try to negate what we learned before? So I saw this in a commentary just a few minutes ago. Nachlas Tzvi, an American rabbi who wrote this sefer, a commentary on the Torah, and he says that it's based on a Zohar that says that when God gave the instructions to build a Mishkan, according to the Zohar, those were given before the golden calf. And everyone was included in the commandment to contribute to the Mishkan. What I mean by everyone is not just every man, woman, and child, but it included also the Erev Rav, the multitude and mixture of nations that joined the Jewish people when they left Egypt. They wanted to join the Jewish people. God was not so excited about it, but Moses did it on his own, and they wreaked havoc because of the golden calf. They were the ones who instigated the creation and the worshiping of the golden calf, and they brought about that great tragedy that ensued. So the instructions to build the Mishkan was given to everyone, including the Erev Rav, this mixture of nations, before the Egel. The actual instructions in the building of the Mishkan, when Moses delivered God's instructions, that happened after the golden calf. At that point, God says, I don't want the Erev Rav, I don't want the mixture of nations to participate. Their contribution will be tainted. So that's why it says Eila. These are, because we're talking about the final analysis, what happened with the construction of the Mishkan. This is a departure from what we were doing before. Before we were dealing with God's instructions, and now we're dealing with the implementation, which only included the Jews who were part of the Jewish nation, but not the Erev Rav who joined the Jewish people and did not do justice to their position within the Jewish community by helping to construct the Egel and actually instigating the construction of the golden calf. Now, question is asked about accounting. There's a principle mentioned in the Talmud that blessings are only present in things that are not counted. If someone, let's say, is harvesting his grain and it counts the grain, the grain will not increase. But if you don't count it, if you don't know how much you have, there could always be a blessing, and there could be more than what you will get when you count. That the blessing is only there in things that are hidden from the eye. And the rationale behind that is based on the concept of ayin hara, the evil eye. That when people look at other people's possessions and they're able to quantify it, and it evokes jealousy, that's a damaging, destructive force that can affect the success in what you have. So if you're anticipating a blessing, you will lose that blessing because of the ayin hara, because of the evil eye. Whatever the rationale behind that, however it works, that's the principle. So why over here do we have an entire Torah portion named and devoted to the idea of accounting? It goes against the principle that blessings do not dwell. And when we say blessings, we don't only mean quantity blessings, that they could be more than what you thought was there, but it could also mean spiritual blessings, that you have success in what you're doing. Showing off what you have does not do good for you. It could actually cause a person harm. So why would we show off all of the items that we had for the Mishkan and give it a precise accounting? So the answer, I don't remember where I saw this answer, that Moses is the one who does the accounting. When Moses does the counting and the accounting, there is no problem with blessing. Blessing will always be there. Why is it that Moses would get rid of any possibility of the ayin hara, of the evil eye? Because Moses represented and personified the attribute of emes, of truth. Aaron was chesed, was kindness. Moses was emes, was truth. Moses would lay down the law. Moses was not as flexible, you could say, as Aaron was. It's not that Aaron went against the law, but he was much more understanding, because Moses was into emes. Emes, truth, is a very powerful force, and the negative forces cannot counter it. Negativity could always have an effect on a person because a person who is vulnerable, because they're not emes, they're not true, they're not consistent, they open themselves up for negative energy to affect them. But when a person is truly emes, which is a trait that is extremely challenging and elusive, but Moses reached the highest level of emes, there was no room for the negative energy to enter into his actions. That's why the Talmud says that anything that Moses built, anything that he did, would never be destroyed. And that's why the Talmud says the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, is still around, is never destroyed. The temple was destroyed. The temple built by Solomon was destroyed. The temple built by the Jews who returned from Babylonian exile was destroyed. They were holier than the Mishkan. They were permanent, permanent structures, but they were destroyed. The Mishkan, which is a temporary, flimsy, relatively speaking, structure, was never destroyed. Why? Because it was Moses' handiwork. What's the connection? Because Moses represented the trait of emes. Emes means not just true. I mentioned this many times in many classes, that when you say the word emes or emet, which is the Sephardic pronunciation, it doesn't just mean truth, which is the way it's always translated, but Hebrew words have so many more nuances. It means truth, yes, absolutely. If a person says a lie, it's not emes, but it's much more than not lying. Emes means total consistency. The way you are on the inside, that's how you are on the outside. The way you are on the outside, that's how you are on the inside. You're not any difference whether it's summer, spring, autumn, or winter. You're the same day and night. There's a certain continuity and consistency that makes you impervious to negative influences. And the Jerusalem Talmud says that the Hebrew word emet, or emes, has the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which tells you what is emes. Emes is something that is consistent from the beginning through the middle to the end. There's no place where your spirituality is somehow lagging and missing. And even though the Torah tells us stories that Moses did something that God was not happy, we have to understand that on a different level, which is not the time and place to go into it, that we should only be doing our mitzvahs with the same spiritual goodness of Moses' sins. There was a story of a chassid, I forgot which chassid it was, which Rabbi. he would follow the Rebbe to Tashlich. Tashlich is when you symbolically throw your sins into the river on Rosh Hashanah. So he would go there to pick up his Rebbe's sins, because in his mind, the Rebbe's sins were like mitzvahs to him. So Moses' life was totally consistent, and that's why he was not vulnerable, and any type of negative thing that could happen from counting did not apply to things that he built. Now, why did Moses have to make an accounting? Would anyone suspect Moses, the holiest, most righteous person that ever lived from the beginning of creation until today? The only one who surpassed Moshe in some respects is Mashiach, but otherwise Moshe is the top. And yet they suspected him that he had hoarded some of the money, some of the gold and silver for himself. How could that be? So, and Reb Meir Shapiro, the famous rabbi in Poland, he was a member of the Polish parliament before World War II. He established a major yeshiva in Lublin. He established also the study of a page of Talmud a day. Very prominent rabbi, great orator, brilliant scholar. And he asked the question, he said, when it came to the Egel, to the golden calf, everyone gave gold. All the men gave their jewelry and they gave their gold and silver. And what came out of it? A measly calf made out of gold. Not very much. Did anyone demand an accounting from the instigators of the Egel? Did anyone say, we want to make sure that every bit of gold we gave was used for the objective of creating this golden calf? No one complained. But when it came to Moses, who built a Mishkan, a sanctuary, a huge, compared to the Egel, a huge construction venture, people were suspecting him of stealing, of pilfering, of hoarding some of the materials for himself, as if Moses needed to enrich himself from this. Moses was independently wealthy, we're told, that when God told him to use the sapphire to use for the tablets, whatever was the chips were given to Moses. So Moses was independently wealthy, and I don't even understand why wealth mattered. When you were in the desert, all your food was supplied to you by the manna, all the clothing was supplied by the clouds. You had everything. You had no need to buy anything, but people still liked to hoard wealth, and they suspected Moses that he was going to steal some of the supplies. How could that be? So one way of explaining that is that when it comes to holiness, God knows that he wants us to have free choice. Anything that's holy is attractive by definition. It's fulfilling, it's attractive, it's beautiful, it's majestic. And that would make it impossible for a person to say, no, I don't want to do it because I don't like it. How could you not like it? What is there not to like when it comes to holy things? On the other hand, things that are unholy are disgusting, are reprehensible. Why would anyone want to commit a sin? Why would anyone want to do something that's so sinful? It's so ugly. It's so meaningless and so, reprehensible. So in order to give us free choice, that people would be able to do a sin, and people will be able to and want to do a mitzvah with a challenge, God made it so that doing the mitzvah, you're always doubting whether it's the right thing. Maybe it's not the right thing. How do I know God really wants me to do it? What value does my mitzvah have? Well, this is a molek, which this Shabbos is also the Shabbos Zocha, when we read the part of the Torah about Amalek as we come before Purim. Not this Shabbos, I'm sorry, next Shabbos, the Shabbos after. Because Amalek has the numerical value as the word suffix, doubt. Amalek sows doubts in us and says to us, why do we want to do the mitzvah? It's not really valuable. It has no value. And if it has some value, your one mitzvah is going to do anything, is going to accomplish anything. There are millions of people besides you. What is your contribution worth? Why should I give a little bit of charity when they need $1 million and I can give $10? It doesn't really make a difference. No, every penny makes a difference. But God made it so that you have things that deter you from doing the right thing. So that's why when you're called upon to donate to a holy cause, I want to make sure that the rabbi didn't steal some of the money. I want to make sure that the president of the shul didn't keep some of the donations that come in there. We're always demanding an accounting. And there's nothing wrong with demanding an accounting, because the Torah says you should always keep clean hands, always make sure that people will not suspect you. The question is, why would you suspect? And the answer is, God instilled that in our nature to make doing something right challenging, that we shouldn't just be automatically drawn to doing what's proper. We shouldn't just give away our money without any effort, without any sacrifice. The sacrifice is that we're always wondering, did we really do the mitzvah? Maybe they're stealing the money and it didn't go for the intended cause. On the other hand, when it comes to doing something negative, in order to make it possible for us to want to sin, God makes it easy. We don't have any qualms about it. We're not questioning whether it's going for the right cause or the wrong cause. That's one approach. There's another approach, a little bit the opposite approach. The Rambam, Maimonides, says that every Jew naturally wants to do that which God commands us to do. That's the inner desire of every Jew. So then why do we do things that are not consistent with that inner desire? Because we have a Yetzer Hara, we have an evil inclination that covers up our internal innate belief in God and belief in the Torah and desire to do everything He wants us to do. That's the cover-up. And therefore, when we want to contribute, when we're dealing with doing a mitzvah, we really want to do the mitzvah. So we're very concerned. You know what could happen? Maybe I gave a donation to this organization that's supposed to help people, and maybe the officers in the organization take most of the money for themselves, and they pocket it. And in that case, I won't do the mitzvah. So it's the natural tendency of a Jew to say, I want to make sure my mitzvah is done right. And therefore, I demand an accounting. I want to see where the money went, because that's the only way you will be able to do a mitzvah. So even though sometimes it comes out in a negative way, you're suspecting honest people of stealing money, but your really motivation is, I want the mitzvah. I want to make sure my mitzvah is done properly. The Talmud tells us that the prophet Jeremiah, who was taunted by people, cursed them. What was his curse? His curse was that even when they give tzedakah, it shouldn't go for the right cause. They shouldn't get the credit for giving tzedakah. But the nature of a Jew is they want to get the credit for it. They want to do the mitzvah, and they want to do it right. Conversely, when it comes to donating to an illegal, illicit venture, like the golden calf, deep down, you really don't want to do it. You feel guilt. Even when you do the sin, a Jew feels guilt. And that's why if the money doesn't go for the ultimate goal of the construction of the golden calf or whatever the sin might be, you're not so upset. Because deep down, you don't really want to do it. You really don't want to sin. You feel guilty. If, let's say, God forbid, someone does something that causes someone harm and you're told that that person became very ill, is seriously injured or worse, you'll feel terrible guilt. Even though you intended to harm the person, you'll feel terrible guilt. And then when they tell you, no, we made a mistake, the person is doing okay, you'll feel relieved because deep down you really don't want to do it. Why is it that a person should always be beyond reproach? Should I care what others think about me? Why was Moses so concerned about producing an accounting for all of the materials that went into the construction of the Mishkan? Why would he be so concerned? So the answer is several points. Number one, there's something called maris ayin. When you do something wrong, other people look at you, and if they think you're a respectable person, they say, well, if he can do it, if she can do it, I could certainly do it. So you're actually causing other people to sin. Even though what you did was innocent, they didn't know that. They thought you did something wrong. So if you ever do something that can be viewed the wrong way, you have an obligation to make sure that people realize that what you did was not wrong, or not engage in that kind of behavior, period, because it could lead people to erroneously emulate what you just did. That's one rationale. Another rationale is it's a sin to suspect someone who's innocent. So by you doing something that has the appearance of impropriety, even though it's totally proper, you are causing people to suspect you and causing them to sin. It's a sin to cause other people to sin. Torah says you're not allowed to put a stumbling block before the blind, which is interpreted by the Talmud to mean that you cannot do something that will facilitate another person's transgression. So by you doing something that is misinterpreted as something negative, but is not negative, but people will suspect you, and that's wrong. So Moses was doing what was beyond reproach. In this Torah portion, we find the expression that they did, Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe, as God commanded Moses. How many times does this appear in the Parsha? 19 times. The Jerusalem Talmud says, why do we say the Amidah, the standing prayer, known as Shmona Esrei, which means 18? Because the Torah mentions 18 times Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe, as God commanded Moses. And it doesn't count the first time that phrase is mentioned. It only starts counting after the Torah introduces Bezalel, the architect, and then it talks about the deputy, Aholiav. From that point onward, it's 18. So the question is, number one, what's the connection of 18 times as God commanded Moses with our prayers? And secondly, why are we not counting the 19th time, the first time it's mentioned, which would be number 19? Now, actually, we now have 19 blessings, but originally it was 18, and the 19th was omitted. Another thing, the Jerusalem Talmud calls the content of this week's parsha as the second Mishkan. Why is it the second? There's only one Mishkan. It's the repetition. Well, that's the key to understanding. The Mishkan came in two levels. There's the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, the way it was in theory, in a spiritual realm. And then there's the actual Mishkan, the way it was brought down into the physical world, into the physical realm. And they were not necessarily the same. What happens in heaven, it does not always materialize down here on earth. There's a misalignment sometimes between what happens up there and what happens down here. The Mishkan was about taking the ideal, spiritual ideal, and translating that into the world down here. Bezalel was more up there in the clouds. The word Bezalel means in the shade of God, in the shadow of God. Bezalel was a heavenly person. It says he knew all the secrets of how to create the world. The letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the forces, like the DNA, which brought about existence. He knew what those forces were, and he used them to create the Mishkan. But everyone else was down to earth. They were bringing it down to this earth. That's exactly what prayer is. The question is asked, on Rosh Hashanah, God decides whatever we're going to get throughout the year. If God decides we're going to make $1 million, we're going to make $1 million and no more. But what about, do we make no less? Is it possible that it was determined that we'll make $1 million and we don't make the $1 million? And the answer is yes. Because the $1 million are allocated and they're in escrow, as it were. They're in trust. They don't come down to us. Every day we have to pray to bring what was allocated and put in a bank, as it were, to withdraw that energy and bring it down to this world. We have to do that every day. So if a person doesn't pray, yes, $1 million was allocated to them, but there's no guarantee that they'll get even a penny of it. Or whatever amount they'll get, it may not be the full amount, because every day is like another day of judgment. So that's why we pray every day. Prayer, what we do is to take what was allocated in heaven down into earth. That's exactly what the Mishkan was in this parsha of Pekudei. It's taking what was allocated, the Mishkan as it was in the heavenly spheres, in the Betzalel dimension, brought down to our dimension down here. And that's exactly what will happen in the future when the third Beis HaMikdash will be built. The third Beis HaMikdash, on one hand it says, will be built by Mashiach. He will lead the building. It will be built by humans. And in other places it says that it'll come down prefabricated from heaven. So there are several ways of reconciling those two statements, those two sources. And the Rebbe says one way of reconciling it is that, yes, we will build the Beis HaMikdash, the third temple, but then the heavenly temple will come down and enter into and be vested within the earthly temple. So we'll have both versions of the temple consolidated into one entity. That's exactly what the 18 times of this parsha, where it says, as God commanded Moses, which parallels the 18 blessings of the Shemona Esrei, because it's the same idea of taking what's in heaven and bringing it down to earth. May we soon see imminently the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash by Mashiach, and then the heavenly temple entering into it. May we see this happen even today. Everyone have a good Shabbat Shalom.